writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. We're your hosts. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Joni.
This week on the podcast, we are talking to author Steff Green. She writes dark fantasy and paranormal novels for adults under her pen name Steffanie Holmes, and she has published over 30 books and was the recipient of the 2017 Attitude Award for Artistic Achievement, and she also was nominated in 2018 for the New Zealand Women of Influence Award. It was a delight talking to Steff.
It's an awesome interview, and I really, really enjoyed talking to her. She talked to us mostly about writing and about building your career as an indie, which she knows a lot about because she also has a podcast called Rage Against the Manuscript, which is a lot of writing advice. And she also has a lot of articles and books, and she runs courses for writers who are looking to inject a little punk rock ethos into their indie author careers. So she really knows what she's talking about. It was a really, really informative, interesting conversation, and we're excited for you to hear it. Here's the interview.
Thank you, Steff, for joining us on the podcast today.
It's awesome. Thank you for having me, Joni and Steff.
So before we get into all the hard questions, we want to know a little bit more about yourself.
So my name is Steff, and I live here in beautiful New Zealand, and I write paranormal romance and supernatural suspense under my pen name Steffanie Holmes, and I also have a website for authors, which is called Rage Against the Manuscript.
That's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about Rage Against the Manuscript, why you started it, and how it serves other authors?
I sure can. So basically, I started it because I've been writing since, I've been self-publishing since sort of 2014, 2015. And, when I started, things were really hard and I didn't really know what I was doing. And I sort of hit my stride about 2015. And I was able to quit my day job in 2018. And I write full-time, and it is basically the most fun that anyone can have, I think. I just love it so much. And I spend a lot of time talking to other authors and hearing about the problems that they're having. And I just thought, well, I've done this, I've been there before, I have been through this process, and sometimes you just really need someone to sort of say, like, don't give up, and here is a really simple solution to this thing that's been bugging you for months and months. Exactly. And so I thought, well, I'll sort of make this, I was sort of talking to people one-on-one, and I thought, well, I'll make a little website and I'll put some of my thoughts out there, and then everyone it can help lots of people. And it kind of grew and grew into this ridiculous thing, and I called it Rage Against the Manuscript because I thought that was really fun, and I'm a bit of a gothy metalhead kind of person, so it suited me. And so now there's a podcast, and there's lots of articles, and I've got books, and I've got courses, and I do mentoring and all these kind of things, and it's kind of really grown into its own sort of crazy thing.
Did you always want to start off publishing indie, or did you look at other options when you started?
I spent about 10 years really fiercely pursuing traditional publishing. And I actually had a publishing deal with a big 5 publishing house, which was amazing. I sort of, all that work, and I'd written like 5 or 6 books at that point. And finally, I had this book deal. And then my editor at the house decided to retire. And the publishing house decided that her retirement was a really good time to go in there and mix things up and sort of dramatically shrink her imprint. And so about half the authors got cut and got the contracts cancelled, and I was one of the authors that got my contract cancelled. And I was gutted doesn't even begin to describe how horrible that felt. And I thought, gosh, I'm just going to have to start this whole kind of harrowing process all over again. And that was around the time where authors like Amanda Hocking and Hugh Howey and Joe Conrath were starting to talk about online about publishing their books, and and readers reading them in ebooks. And it's also the time, funnily enough, that New Zealand got Kobo.
Oh.
Yeah, which was the first e-reader that was available in New Zealand. And I'd always been very staunchly, no, I'm never going to read on an e-reader. and my husband and I, we're both super keen readers, and we thought, well, we'll go along to the bookshop and we'll check it out. And the guy showed it to us over the counter, and I looked at this, the page, sort of the ink screen, and I looked at being able to enlarge any book that I read, because I'm visually impaired. I'm legally blind, so being able to just enlarge a book and kind of hold it slightly further away from my face than right against my nose. It was just, I was like, wow, I want one. And so the two things kind of combined, and I went, my gosh, I want to self-publish, and I want people, I want to be in on this ebook thing, because I can see, being able to carry like 1,000 books around on holiday in like a tiny little thing. I can see it being big, and I never looked back.
That's really cool. So you were basically with Kobo from day one.
I was with Kobo from day one, and it was one of the things I was so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, I'll be able to see my books on the Kobo website. It was really funny, yeah.
That's really awesome.
I love that. Yeah. I'm wondering, so typically indie authors, I find they write a lot of long series. I'm wondering, was that a strategic move on your part, or do you just find that writing longer stories fits kind of your writing process and like the stories you want to tell?
It was kind of a little bit of both. I mean, for indie authors, writing series is sort of the most sensible marketing, branding decision that you can make. It's pretty much the most sensible decision you can make, because you can advertise book one, you can lose money on book one, and it doesn't matter if you don't make money on book one with advertising, because those some of those readers will then go on to read book 2, book 3, book 10, and that's where you make your income. And it just seems so sensible to not to do that. And so there was that factor, but in the beginning I sort of didn't really think, I think I didn't really think about that as a business decision. I just, most of the books I read were in series. I just sort of, as a writer, I just thought in long stories. And also I find I always have a problem where I cram like far too much stuff into one day. And so often my books have like things happen over like 3 days. And I was writing some of the first books I wrote were standalone romances, and I realized that I'd written a series of like 6 books where every single couple got together and like got engaged after like a week. And I thought, I don't think this is really for me. So being able to write a longer series means you can actually like develop a relationship over months, which is a revelation to me. So yeah.
What's your writing process like?
It's very, very weird. So I have this thing that I do, which I didn't realize was unusual, but apparently is really unusual. And it's called skeleton drafting. And I actually have a little mini course on my website about it, and a couple of free articles, because people are quite interested in it. So what I do is I am a pantser or a gardener. So I don't like to know anything about the book really before I begin. But what I do, and so I don't have an outline, but I have to write really fast because I like to publish sort of 8-ish books, 10-ish books a year. And so what I do is I sit down, and in about 2 to 3 days, I fast draft what I call a skeleton draft of the book, which is about 15 to 20,000 words of complete rubbish, basically. It's like separating the book into chapters, and each chapter might have like 500 words of just like dialogue and like action, and half the time the sentences aren't even finished, and it's terrible. It looks appalling. But that's where I figure out everything that happens in the book. The twists and the turns, and the emotional arc of the characters, and the conflict of the story. I figure all of that out in this fast draft in like 2 to 3 days. And so it's kind of like an outline, except that when you finish an outline, you have an outline, and when you finish a skeleton draft, you have 15 to 20,000 words of your actual book already written. And then I go back and I do a proper first draft, which ends up being about 50,000 words, and I just smooth over everything and sort everything out and finish all the sentences. And then I do a third and usually a fourth draft, which kind of I call it making it pretty, where I like add all the motifs and the themes and you know, sort of pump up the emotion and finish the sex scenes, because I always leave those to last. And yeah, and that's my process.
Wow, I don't think we've had an author explain it like this on this podcast before.
Yeah, it's so funny because I just assumed that was how everyone wrote books. And then I'd started sort of quite recently started talking to other authors about process and craft and things like that, and they're like, what? I've never heard of that. How do you do that? So yeah, so I've been kind of trying to talk about it with other people, because it's quite a good method if you're like me and you don't like to, you know, you want to get to know the story and get to know the characters as you go, but you also, the problem with that is you often get stuck really easily. Like us pantsers, we're always, you know, we very often get the writer's block because we don't know what's going to happen next. And the skeleton draft kind of gives you the best of both worlds.
That's pretty cool.
How long does it take you to typically write a book?
About 4 to 6 weeks. Yeah, so it's about 3 days.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's about 3 days for the skeleton draft, and it's about 2 to 3 weeks for the sort of the proper first draft, and then the other 2+ weeks to make it really pretty.
That's quick.
And you said you release 8 to 10 books a year, which is very much like an indie thing, right? Like if you were traditionally published, that would not be happening, which is one of the things I think is really cool about indie publishing. But is there anything else that particularly appeals to you about doing it yourself?
Oh, I just kind of, I never thought I would have wanted to do this, but actually I just kind of love it. I love, you know, talking to my designer about my covers, and I love kind of all the businessy stuff of it, and talking to other authors, and I do kind of love publishing a lot. And you know, there's lots of stories in my head and I'm never going to run out. And, you know, I'm already looking at all the books I want to write, and there's like 30 of them, and I can only do 8 to 10 next year. And I'm like, oh, why can't I write faster? You know, and you just, yeah, it's seriously, it's so much fun. Like I still kind of look at my life. It's been 3 years now I've been full-time author, and I still kind of look at my life and I'm like, how is this? How is this a job? You know, it's just, it must be illegal to have this much fun at a job.
That's so great, though, that you've made it work for you so well. I mean, I think we've heard that from a few authors that have gone full-time, just like, you're so lucky to have found the thing that you love doing.
Exactly. And I never want to take it for granted. And you know, whenever I talk to other authors and that's what they want, I really want to be the person who can be there for them and say, look, you know, look, I did it, and I'm not, you know, Faulkner or anything like that. So, you know, if I can do it, you can do it. It's completely possible, and that's what's so amazing. And it really only became possible for me because of indie publishing and because of ebooks and e-readers, and yeah, that makes me really happy.
Another thing that you mentioned before was that you had repackaged one of your series recently. Is that right?
Yeah, so I had a series. So I write paranormal romance, and I was writing in this sort of trope subgenre of paranormal romance called reverse harem, which is basically you've got your heroine, and instead of having one love interest, one hero in the story, she has 3 or more, and it's not a love triangle where she has to choose between all of them. At the end of the series, she gets a happily ever after with all of them. So they're really fun to write. And I had, this was the first series that I published in reverse harem, and it's sort of largely, you know, most of the readers are on Amazon. So the books were there, and I decided quite recently it was time to take them wide and build a bigger audience wide. And doing that, I sort of took a look at the series and I said, you know, it needs a facelift. And you know, it's not my most popular series, and I sort of looked at, you know, why, what's happening, and one thing that I realized was that I think the books were a little bit confusing in terms of their titles and their covers. So they're paranormal romances, they're set in the modern world, but the books are called The Castle of something. So The Castle of Earth and Embers, the Castle of Fire and Fable, because our heroine inherits a castle And I love castles. I'm obsessed with castles, so I wrote this cool book so I could write about castles, but set in the modern world. But because the title has the word castle in them, they kind of I think they look to people like they're sort of fantasy books, like set in the medieval period or set in like a fantasy medieval-ish world. And so the readers who were picking them up weren't getting what they wanted because they thought they were getting these like fantasy books, and the readers who would have liked them weren't picking them up because they thought they were fantasy books. So I got rid of the word castle in the titles and just called them Earth and Embers and Fire and Fable. And I got some new covers made, just kind of updating them and making them look a bit more modern and like, hey, this is definitely set in this world. And then I've published them all wide on all my platforms, on Kobo, my favorite platform, and set the first book to free. And I'm finding new readers now for this series, which is 3-4 years old now, and that's so exciting. That makes me so happy.
That's so cool. And I think that like people don't think about this when they're going into indie, but that's a huge advantage, is being able to experiment and make mistakes and redo them, which you can't really do if a publishing house, they'll invest money in you once, right? Pretty much.
Exactly, and they're always looking at the next round of books that come in. But I'm able to go back to my backlist and say, well, can I do a little tweak that will make this series sell a little bit better? Or so recently, another thing I did was I went back through all of my books, which is 40 plus books on all the platforms, which is 5+ platforms for every single lemon book, and rejigged all the back matter and just made sure that the my newsletter link was pointing to the right page on my website, which many of them weren't, and that I was telling people, hey, you finished this book, you like this book, read the next book, and I was actually pointing to a really good book that they might like next, rather than back when I only had a few books, I might not have had the best book to recommend next. So I did that huge update, and it took like 5 days of my life. And that was terrible, but it's gonna, that's the thing that's gonna pay off, over the next year or more. Yeah. So, and that's super cool. That's not something we could do. I could do if I had a publisher.
That's true, because I was on TikTok recently.
Very cool.
I've started using TikTok, but I've noticed a lot of reverse harem has been like, a lot of people are recommending that, and it was interesting to see that like you've kind of picked up on that and been able to like. So essentially put out a new series, I'm using like quotes, for the trends that are going on right now. It's like, I don't think any traditional publisher could do it as well or as quickly as you've been able to do it.
Exactly. And part of that, being able to write fast and react to trends and things like that, that's such an advantage that indies have. And, the people that are really successful as indie authors are the people that are like, that's our advantage. So I'm going to play to my strengths. I'm going to do that.
You mentioned that you retired from your full-time job in 2018, you said?
Yeah, it was 2018.
Were there any steps that you took that helped you transition to a full-time writer that you think other authors could implement themselves when they're trying to make this transition?
It's possibly a bit of do as I say, not as I do. So I don't do this, but at the same time that I was trying to, so I'd spent sort of three years, where I was earning a decent amount of money in addition to my day job, which was in the tech industry. And we were at a point where possibly I could have quit my job. But my husband and I decided at the time that we would also build our dream house, which we'd designed ourselves. And so we were paying rent on a property, we were building this house, like working on it every single weekend. It was this massive hole in the ground that you just pour money into. It was this massive like stress, so that was going on at the same time. And so I basically couldn't quit until that house was finished. And I had taken on a new job, and because I've been offered this job, and it was great money. It was a good kind of opportunity. I didn't really want it because I wanted to write full time, but the money would have been good and help us finish the house. But the thing was that the job would require me to commute for 5 hours round trip. each day. Yeah, and it's mainly because I can't drive, because I'm blind. So I had to drive to my husband's work, which was an hour, and then take 2 buses to get to the office. And then let me work from home a couple of days a week. But so three days a week, I'd had to do this round trip 5-hour thing. So my husband and I agreed that I would take this job, but only for a year. And so I wrote the date a year in advance in my calendar. This is my resignation day. I'm quitting my job. I'm writing full time. So I was like, right, I've got a year to get my shit together, to get my act together, and we're going to do this. So I basically worked every hour I was awake. When I was on the bus, I was like typing on my computer. I think I wrote 6 books that year, in addition to working this ridiculous job and commuting all this time. I worked every weekend, I worked every night. I did freelance work to bring in extra money, and also the freelance work helped me the first year that I quit my job, kind of to even out the income until my fiction income increased a little bit more, and then I quit all the freelance work. So that was quite a good idea. But yeah, so I had this horrible year where I just worked all the time, and it was stressful, and I was very close to approaching a breakdown where I just couldn't do anything. But then finally the date came up, and I did exactly what I said I would, and I quit my job and went home and wrote books, and it was brilliant.
That's awesome, though. Good for you.
I can only imagine how hard that was.
It sucked. It was a cheer.
Also, how annoying is it that everyone can now just work from home?
Yeah.
I know. I know. But also it's good, and I hope it saves lots of other people from ridiculous 5-hour commutes.
That's a very long commute.
Yeah, really.
I wanted to ask you also, you mentioned that your Reverse Harem series, you'd had it up on Amazon exclusively. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
And then you brought it wide. This is something that a lot of authors ask about, how to go wide, like how to go from building that audience that you already have on Amazon to trying to find a whole new audience. Do you have any advice for that?
For me, my strategy is that I tend to release books into Kindle Unlimited, and I see the exclusivity on Amazon as a really great, inexpensive way to grab new readers. And then my backlist books, so I already had 15 books wide across all platforms when I took this new series wide. And I see wide as the long-term strategy. Wide is where you capture the readers who aren't, who are outside of the US, where you capture readers who are in countries like New Zealand, like where I am, where there isn't such a big sort of dominance of Amazon. And so I see wide as the long-term strategy. And, so what I like about wide so much is that you don't have to, you can have a lot of small wins that really add up really quickly. So I just do little things. I apply for the Kobo promos every single month, the Barnes & Noble promos, Drafted Digital often offers promos, especially for like Apple, which is really cool. I have a couple of perma-free books, and so I just do little nudges on those every now and then. I don't run pay-per-click ads just because I like to keep my money in my pocket. So yeah, I just do little things every now and then, a little free booksy on a perma-free first in series, once every month or a couple of months, and that just keeps things ticking over. And it doesn't have, over time it sort of builds and builds and builds, and it gets to the point where you look at your royalties coming in, and you're like, Kobo is usually my second best platform after Amazon, and I think it's recently been taken over by Apple, but that's taken 2 or 3 years. But I'm at the point now where I can, a lot of months I can pay my mortgage without Amazon, and that can be a long build. It's taken me 3 or 4 years to really get to that point, but it's really, to me, it's the only long-term viable strategy.
I mean, I feel like, the time people expect immediate results, and that's not going to happen. It takes a couple of months to kind of get momentum going, but then, it's like you said, it kind of takes years sometimes to really get where you want to be.
We definitely support that message.
Yeah, and I like my strategy because I feel as though I get the best of both worlds. And I like that.
When I was perusing your website, I noticed that you kind of have like a strong author branding, your covers kind of go together. Like I could tell that's exactly like, that's your book. Steffanie wrote that book. How did you create your author brand, basically?
Basically, I'm a weird person generally, and so my brand is kind of weird. And it's probably one of my strengths, is that I write the books that I, as a weird person, as a bit of a gothy person, want to read. And so it just seems completely natural for me to make sure those books all look like books that I, as this weird person, would want to read. And that my website and, my tagline and all my things kind of reflect this weirdness, because that's sort of who I am. And so, to me, the brand, branding is all about the promise that you make to your readers. Like that's the heart of what a brand is. Is that a brand is not something that you create. You always have a brand, whether you've thought about it or not, because your brand is what other people think about you, or what your readers think about you. And you have the chance to kind of direct that a little bit by making sure that that the promise that you make to them, when someone picks up a Steffanie Holmes book, they're going to get a very specific, very weird experience. And my brand is basically gothic romance, except that gothic romance is not sort of a thing that you can really advertise these days. There's not really a big audience for it. So it's gothic romance for people who don't know that what they really want is gothic romance. And and that's my brand. And people know when they pick up a book from me, that is what they're going to get. They're going to get a very specific experience, and everything I do reflects that specific experience. And it's fun. And I think having a strong brand really helps you, retain your readers. Sometimes it's more of a longer term game. But in the end, having a strong brand really helps you stand out, and it helps you retain readers, because they know they can come back again and again and again and get the same experience.
Related to that, I know that you talk about a lot of the sort of spooky stories and places that have inspired you in your writing. And I love that kind of thing. Like, I'm from Edinburgh, which is super, like, there's a lot of gory, gross history here, which I love. So I wanted to ask you, is there anywhere that you've been or any kind of stories that you've read that have particularly inspired you in that sense?
Oh, everything inspires me so much. I recently, last year, 2019, my husband and I went on a big trip, and it was our 10-year wedding anniversary. And we went on a trip back to this heavy metal music festival in Germany, which was where we went on our honeymoon, because that's the kind of people we are. And while we were there, we went to Romania for 2 weeks.
Ooh.
And this was very much my part of the holiday. And we went to Romania for 2 weeks, and we basically spent 2 weeks exploring the history of Vlad the Impaler, and the kind of the Dracula myths and the vampire mythology and all this stuff. And gosh, I love Romania. It's one of my favorite countries in the world now. So I'm writing a whole series next year, a vampire series, which is basically, that trip was basically the research for.
Ooh.
And I'm so excited. I can't wait to start writing it.
Love that.
So you're very open with your readers with the fact that you're legally blind. How do you find navigating the world of writing and publishing as a disabled author?
It's cool. It's interesting, because one of the reasons why I started really seriously pursuing publishing was because I was trained to be an archaeologist, and what I wanted to be was a museum curator, and I wanted to have like a collection of like weird objects that I just like fiercely protected inside a museum, and went around and lectured people about shrunken heads or something like that. And that was what I wanted. And so I had this internship at a museum, and I worked as a volunteer at a living history museum for 6 months. And every day I'd show up and I'd walk around the museum, and I'd do like artifact storage and stuff, and it was really cool. And then one day a job came up at this museum, And I went and I told the director that I was really interested in the job. It was like an entry level, job. It was below the level of the work I was already doing. And he told me that he wouldn't hire me. He couldn't hire me because I was a health and safety risk. And there was it was like a living history museum, so it had lots of old buildings and stuff. And there was an old well on the site, and I walked past the well every single day, and the well was covered with grate. And he said to me, what if you fall in the well?
What?
Yeah, and I was so taken aback. I just, I'd spent 6 months working for this guy for free. And he, the audacity to say, well, what if you fall in the well that you walk past every single, and it was just such a, this came at the end of a sort of a 1 to 2 year period where I was trying to find a job as an archaeologist or curator or anything. And I kept getting people pushing me back saying, no, we just, we just worry about your eyes around artifacts, and, people I'd done volunteer work for who wouldn't give me a job. And I just starting to realize that the rest of my life was going to be really hard. And I came home and I was in tears, and my husband said, well, you could maybe look at it this way. You have done archaeology. You've done all these really cool things. I went to Greece and worked on digs. Like, I did all these awesome things. Maybe you could say, well, what would I do after archaeology? What was the thing that I would love to do that people couldn't tell me I couldn't do? And the immediate thing that came to mind was I would love to be a writer, but I had no idea how a writer even earned a living. So I had to Google, how do writers earn money? And that was like the moment that really flipped me from, yes, I want to be an archaeologist, to falling out of love with it and wanting to be a writer. And so it's been this thing I've kind of relentlessly pursued, whether people want me to or not, ever since. And so in that respect, it's really wonderful because no one can tell me that I can't. The proof is in the pudding. No one can tell me I can't be a writer. I have adaptations that I use. I have a massive screen which, sits right against my nose. It's really close to it, and I have really large print on the screen and a really dark office because I'm quite light sensitive and things like that. So I can do my job, and there are things that are a little bit odd, like if I go to an author signing. Sometimes people look at me funny because of my eyes, or I won't recognize. I might be talking to someone really famous in a corner, and I won't actually know that I'm talking to them, and at all. It just I fall downstairs all the time, like just stuff like that. But you just crack on, and it's been a wonderful. For the most part, it's been a wonderful, welcoming industry to be a part of, and it's really amazing to see the real push over the last sort of 10 years or so to have more diverse books and more books with heroes and heroines that that people like me can relate to a bit more, and life is good.
And also even just accessibility and in terms of what you were saying about e-readers and being able to enlarge print and that kind of thing, it is easier to get stories out to more people now.
Yes, exactly. And audio, it's made me so happy to be able to put my books into audio myself over the last few years, which automatically means that they're more accessible to people who have print disabilities or fully blind people. And that makes me so happy.
And you also offer scholarships that I read?
Yeah, so I have a course which is called How to Rock Self-Publishing, which is basically a brain dump of everything that I know about self-publishing. And I offer the course for free to any writer of colour or any disabled writer who just emails me and says, hey, I'm a writer with a disability and I'd like to do your course. And I'll basically give them a free thing on the course. And it's just kind of my way of saying, hey, let's have more writers able to have the skills and have the knowledge to be able to get their books and get their stories out there, and let's increase the number of sort of stories of marginalized voices out in the world, and that's never going to be a bad thing. So yeah,
that's awesome. Can we share that in our show notes?
Yep, absolutely.
Excellent.
I will send you the link.
Perfect. We will do that. I wanted to also ask you about going back to the community that you've built. Who, like, if people are interested in joining, like, who is it aimed at? Is it all writers, or is it a particular genre, or limited in any way to region, or is this something for everyone who's interested in writing?
I think there's something for you. So most of my community interested in self-publishing. Whether that's they're still working on their first book, or they've got a few books out and they're just they're looking to improve the way that they're doing things. So the majority of my audience are very interested in self-publishing and being indies. They're not so big on the traditional publishing side. And they're from all over the world, which is awesome. It's really for everyone. I've got sort of more basic things, and I've got more advanced courses and things. My main focus is helping people earn money from their writing, so that's sort of more of the focus rather than other focuses. So
more business than craft kind of thing.
Yeah, more business and helping people sort of strategize and figure out what's the best way to get this book out to the right people and that kind of thing.
What can readers expect from you next?
Oh, so 2021 is a good year for me. I'm very excited. I am finally writing my vampire series, inspired by my trip to Romania and like all my Gothic Anne Rice kind of roots. So I can't wait for that. And I'm writing some more contemporary romance, which I'm quite excited about, because I always thought I was a paranormal romance author. And then I wrote this contemporary series this year, which is kind of inspired by, it's sort of like a mafia series. But the mafia kind of crime families are all inspired by ancient Roman history. So it's weird. It's like everything else I do. It's weird, but in a good way. And I'm writing and it's been really, really successful. So I'm writing a spin-off series for that. And then the other thing that I'm doing this year, which I'm really excited about, is I'm doing what I call a moonshot project. So just a project just for me. That's kind of a big risk, but it could be a big payoff as well. And I'm writing a psychological thriller.
Ooh.
Yeah.
It's a big change.
Yeah, big change. Can be under a pen name. I may pitch it to traditional publishing first. I have not decided. But I know the story. The story is actually inspired by something that happened to me when I was younger. So I'm really excited to kind of finally solve this mystery that has been bugging me for so many years in a book.
That sounds very cool. I have a question. So usually we ask people, what have they been loving lately? But I'm going to change it up for you. I'm assuming you read romance novels. Maybe this is where you tell me you don't. You just write them.
You'll break Steff's heart.
No, I read really, really widely.
Okay.
I always read like 5 books at a time, but I definitely read romance novels.
I'm just wondering, what authors have you been reading that have been like really like challenging the genre that you're reading in, or like really like bringing a new perspective to a genre that you haven't seen before, or something you're just like, I love this book and I can't tell you why?
Oh, what a great question. So I've just read so Jay Bree, who writes like kind of like dark sort of high school romances, kind of with like, the main character is like an assassin. And like a gay, they're dark, they're very lush, they're so well done.
It's like dark academia.
Yeah, it's a dark. I kind of love dark. Anything that could be called dark academia. That's me. Anything with the secret societies in it. Claire Contreras wrote this one called Half Truths, which is Secret Society one, and that makes me so happy. Lilac, B.B. Reed, which is kind of a like a rock star romance one. It was lovely. Bea Page, who again writes, even though I write paranormal, I read a lot of contemporary. I don't really know why, but Bea Page writes these really good, like sort of contemporary kind of bully romances, I guess you kind of call them. But so she's got this one called Academy of Stardom, the series, which is set in a dance school, and like the romance is it's on fire, but the dance is like another character in the story. It's so well written, and the way she kind of describes the dancing and how they all relate to each other, it's just, it's magic. E.M. Moore wrote this crazy book about treasure hunting, and it's like a romance between rival treasure hunters, and the first book's called The Heartless Boys, and I loved that. I loved it so much.
These are great. The combinations that you're saying, I'm like, yeah, I want to read that.
Yeah, I'm loving all the like new like bully, and like I don't like dark romance that's got like stalkers in it and stuff so much, and like serial killers, but if it's got secret societies and if anything like that, I'm like all over that. Yeah.
It's that gothic thing, yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's me. Yeah. Oh, Sierra Simone, that's the other one. She wrote this series called Thornchapel, which is basically, it's like the best gothic romance that's come out in the last 10 years. It's very, but she doesn't call it gothic romance, but it's creepy old house, it's 6 friends, it's got sort of kinky stuff in it, it's just the language is so lush, and she's probably my favorite. Yeah, she's probably my favorite author.
She wrote Priest, Joni. I've been trying to get Joni to read Priest.
Oh, because yeah, we all watched Fleabag around this time last year, and then Steph was like, you now have to read this book about a priest. I was like, I think that was a very specific Fleabag fantasy.
I don't know about that.
You have to read Priest. Yeah.
Okay.
Right? I was like, Joni, it's like pivotal. You need to
Okay, I'll read it before the end of this month. I will report back.
Sure.
Perfect.
Yeah, and then you'll be a Sierra fan for life.
Sierra Simone also writes the best novella length books. She writes a lot of anthologies, and I find that her stories are always the best ones in the anthologies.
Hands down. She just wrote this one that was like a historical anthology, and it's called Duke I'd Like to F, which is a brilliant title. And and her story in that, like historical Duke stories, and hers was great.
I agree. I loved it.
If like travel is allowed next year, you're going to be in Edinburgh for Rare?
Rare's just been postponed to 2022, I think it is, but I will definitely be there, and I'm so excited.
Have you been there before?
I have been before once when I was 15 for about 2 days, but I was a 15-year-old stuck in a school trip, so I didn't get to do any of. The castle was closed. I don't even remember anything else.
Okay, there is a lot of stuff. There's a lot of cool like stories here. Like you can email me if you're going. Like feel free to email me, and I will give you stuff because there's some really cool things in Edinburgh. And like if you go to the right places, like there's some really good stories, and you'll probably love it.
I 100% will love it. I just heard the other day there's this podcast I love called Lore, which is stories from our dark past. So each episode is like historical stories, often about hauntings or like just like weird stuff. And they just did an episode about about Edinburgh Underground.
Yep.
Yeah.
The vaults.
Yeah. And all these, and I was like, it's funny because it was just the week where where Edinburgh got postponed, which was a great thing because I was worried that like even if we could travel next year, I don't think I personally would be able to get from New Zealand to Edinburgh because our borders could still have been closed or.
Well, you guys don't even have a pandemic anymore, right? You're just living life. Like, I'm so jealous.
Yeah, we are incredibly, unbelievably lucky, and I try not to take it for granted.
You have an awesome leader who did not bungle this.
She really did not, and and some of it's luck. Like we're in Ireland, and we didn't get it first in the world, so we kind of got to look at everyone else's systems. But we had great leadership, and we are reaping the benefits.
Our final question is, where can people find you online?
They can find me on my best place to find all my books is my website, which is www.steffanieholmes.com, and that's with 2 Fs, Steffanie with 2 Fs. And you can find all my writing stuff and my podcast at www.rageagainstthemanuscript.com.
Perfect.
We will share those links. Thank you so much, Steff. This has been so good.
Thank you. This has been heaps of fun.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you're interested in reading Steff's books, we will have a link to them on our blog. Or if you're interested in hearing her podcast, check it out at Rage Against the Manuscript.
This episode was produced by Joni DiPlacido and Stephanie McGrath. Production assistance was by Rachel Wharton. Editing by Kelly Robothon. Music is provided by Tearjerker, and huge thanks to Steff for being guest today.
If you're ready to start your self-publishing journey today, sign up for free at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing.